Okay, dear students, hello and welcome to this video lecture series on behalf of CLAT SATHEE. I'm Dr. Animesh, and today we are going to continue our discussion on matrimonial laws. And just like in the last class we discussed maintenance, today we are going to discuss adoption. That's a very, very interesting topic, and a lot of cases of adoption you must have heard. You must be familiar with this concept already. Today we are going to understand the intricacies of it, how it works. So without any delay, let's begin. First things first, we have to understand how adoption works. So there are various dimensions to it. Obviously, we'll discuss what's the meaning of adoption. If adoption happens, then what? The consequences of it. Then we'll discuss adoption under Hindu law. Then we'll discuss adoption under JJ Act, Juvenile Justice Care and Protection of Children Act 2015. It's a secular law essentially, so it's secular adoption. When I say it's secular, it means that it is applicable and available to every citizen of country. Everyone can do adoption under this act. So there is no religious foundation. So there is Hindu adoption, then there is secular adoption, and then there is a procedure for adoption. How adoption happens, who certifies adoption, and when adoption will be considered complete. This is something very important to understand. So let's first discuss how adoption works. Adoption का मतलब क्या है? Now, see, the concept of adoption, the idea of adoption is ancient. And under Hindu law, the Dharmic Shastras, they allow for having Dattak children. The adoption is called Dattak Putra, adopted child. It's called Dattak Putra, Dattak Putri. The primary idea was that if a person is not having a son, or is childless, then it is very difficult for that person to attain salvation. And if a person fails to have a true born son because of any reason for that matter, then it is available for him to take another child as his own, so that that child will be considered his child, and he will give spiritual and worldly benefit to that person. And if I adopt a child, that child will be considered my child, and that child will help me in this world and in afterlife by doing my shraddha and everything. So that's why having a child was considered very important, and that is why the Hindu Shastras, the whole in it's a very universal concept, and it is based on the logic that a person needs children to survive. In their old age, they need care and they need support. For that, having children is important. That's why there is the idea of adoption. Now the adoption ka matlab is very simple, that you uproot a child from one family and plant it in the other family. When we give the child in adoption, the family in which that child is given, that child becomes the child of that family, adoptive family, for all intent and purposes. This is very important to understand. Suppose I adopt a child. Now that child has a status of a true born child who is biologically born in my family. There is absolutely no difference between an adoptive child and a child who is born legitimately through true born child, biological child. In law, we consider adoptive child and true born child at par with each other. That it's absolutely same. If a child is born in your family, is born to you, that is your son or daughter. And if you adopt a child, that is also son or daughter. And there is absolutely no difference in the eyes of law. Who will get your property? Both of them will get your property. True born child and an adoptive child. Both will get your property. Who will take care of, who is legally bound to take care of you when you are old? Both of them are obligated. So it's very simple. A child is uprooted from the family, one family, and is planted in the other family. So if the adoption happens, the adopted child and the adoptive parent, they form the same bond as is formed by a biological connect. Additionally, see, it's even stronger than biology. Why so? Because an adoptive child, if you adopt a child, that will always be your legitimate children. As far as biological child is considered, it can be a legitimate or illegitimate children. Like if you have children with a person who is not your spouse, that child is considered as illegitimate child. But if you adopt a child, there is no question of being legitimate or illegitimate. That will always be your legitimate child. So that is something very clear. So suppose I have an illegitimate child who is biologically related to me, and I also adopt a child. Now, who will inherit my property? That adoptive child will inherit my property, although he might not share any blood with me. And that true born biological child will not inherit my property because that child is illegitimate. So this is very interesting. Adoption creates a legitimate kinship, but at the same time, it also extinguishes. Effect of adoption is extinguishing and creation of rights. So where the rights are extinguished, it is completely extinguished in birth family. Yani ki suppose I have a child and I gave that child to adoption in to another family. Now I have no claim over that child whatsoever. I am the birth parent. I gave the child was born true born, biologically born to me. But once I give that child in adoption, all the rights of the birth parent over that adoptive child is extinguished, is completely gone. At the same time, the child's right to the birth parent is also considered extinguished. It is considered that the child was never born in that my family. जैसे ही मेरा एक चाइल्ड है और मैंने उसको अडॉप्शन में दे दिया, the legal fiction that comes into picture is that the child was never born in my family. And at the same time, the child is adopted by a family. That adoptive family में उसके सारे rights and duties create हो जाएंगे as if he was always born in that family. He will have all the rights, duties, and consequences. So this is very important to understand. The moment a birth parent, जैसे कि that's why we give the example of uprooting. Like you take a plant, a young plant, and you simply uproot it, and then you plant it someplace else. Now the plant which is planted at a different place, the roots of that plant will just absorb that land, will stick to that land into the new place, and it will leave everything from the old place. That's why adoption means uprooting a child from one family and planting it in another, so that all the rights in the birth family gets extinguished, and all the rights in the adoptive family is created. This is how adoption works. Secondly, creation of prohibited relationship. Now see, in one respect, rights or the birth family is relevant for an adoptive child for only one purpose. देखिए, in all official document, adopted child will use the name of the adoptive father, adoptive mother. Everything he'll use the surname of the adoptive family. He will identify himself as in he is an adoptive family. Okay, but nonetheless, as far as prohibited relationships in relation to marriage is considered, then the adopted child has two sets of prohibited relationships. One in his birth family and another in his adoptive family. See, even if a child is adopted to some other family, biology still links that child to his birth family. So that child cannot marry his birth mother or his birth sister, because that will be considered incest, and that will be considered very problematic. At the same time, that child, when he's adopted into another family, he creates a separate set of relatives. He will have father, mother, grandfather, grandmother, uncle, aunt, everything. So, adoptive child is not allowed to marry close relatives in his birth family as well as close relatives in the adoptive family. So he will have two sets of prohibited relationships. Suppose that adoptive child has a sister in adoptive family. Now that sister will be considered off limits, and obviously the marriage is not possible, although they might not be related, but still related by blood, but they are related by law. So that's why the relationship is prohibited. At the same time, an adoptive child cannot go and have a relationship with anyone in the birth family, because although they might not be related by law at this point of time, but they are related by blood. So both of them are prohibited in law. So effect of adoption also includes that there is a creation of prohibited relationship. And third and very important understanding is when adoption happens, whatever right is already created for that child in the birth family, now that right will be protected even after adoption. जैसे कि I'll give you a simple example. Suppose there is a child. Now that child got a lot of property and owns a lot of property. Now that property he might have inherited from some relative or it might have been gifted to him. So suppose that child who has a lot of property in his own name, it's very important. In his own name, he is given in adoption. Now the question is whether his right over the property that he owned in the birth family will remain while he is in adoptive family. The answer is yes. Yes. Whatever property is owned by that child will remain his property even after the adoption. So the right which has already been created. See, but the property he has not inherited or he is not owns yet. Then he cannot claim that right. I'll give you a very simple example. Suppose there is a child. His father died. So father's property that child inherited, obviously that becomes the property of the child. Now let's say that this child is given an adoption. So whether he will go to his adoptive family along with the property that he inherited, the answer is yes. But at the same time, if he was given in adoption and the property was not in his name, yani ki he didn't inherit the property, but let's say his birth father was very rich and he had a lot of property, but he didn't die. It was his property at the time of adoption, and the child was given by the father himself. So here the child had no property. There was a possibility that he will inherit the property if the father died, but he didn't die. The property was still not in the child's name. So if the child is given an adoption and after that the birth father dies, now this child will inherit not a thing, will not inherit nothing. Because once adoption happens, all the relationship is severed from the birth family, except the property that he already owns. If the property is already owned by that child, so even after adoption, he will retain that property. But if after adoption, there is a question that who will inherit the property of the birth father, whether adoptive child can inherit that, answer is no. Adoption के साथ ही रस्सी कट गई. उससे पहले जो प्रॉपर्टी उसको मिलनी थी, अगर वो मिल गई है तो फिर तो बहुत अच्छी बात है. पर अगर उसको उस समय तक प्रॉपर्टी नहीं मिली थी और अडॉप्शन हो गया, तो अडॉप्शन के बाद वो बर्थ फैमिली के किसी प्रॉपर्टी, किसी भी राइट्स पे उसका क्लेम नहीं है. दैट इज मेंट बाय दिस protection of already created rights. So this is how adoption works. So adoption mein, if the child is given his adoption, then whatever he owns also goes with that child. But once the child goes, then he cannot have claim over anything that is there in the birth family. That is the consequence of adoption. Moving on. Acha, Hindu adoption. See, adoption is either allowed in Hindu law or it is allowed in secular law under Juvenile Justice Care and Protection of Children Act 2015. There is no adoption under Muslim law. It's not considered permissible. Muslim law as in itself does not allow adoption to happen. It is considered, not only it is not provided for, but it is considered prohibited. Nobody should nobody should use the name of anyone else other than their own biological father. So that is why it is prohibited for for the person to be adopted under Muslim law. But Supreme Court on a PIL filed by a particular woman called Shabnam Hashmi said that even the person who professes Islam can adopt a child under secular law. That is why that law is secular. Everyone can avail that the facility or the benefit that is associated with that law. So everyone can adopt under JJ Act, but Hindu Adoption and Maintenance Act, only Hindus can adopt and Hindus can be given adoption. All those things we'll discuss. See, adoption under Hindu law, The first requirement is the person who is giving the child must be a Hindu, the person who's taking a child must be a Hindu, and the child must be a Hindu. So Hindu law is applicable only to the Hindu givers, Hindu takers, and Hindu child. So the question is, who can give in adoption? So the answer is very simple. Parents can give in adoption. Parents can give in adoption means father and mother. If both are alive, the both have to give consent in order to give that child in adoption. If one of the parent is alive and another parent is either dead or is unavailable due to legal reason, like he has become sannyasi or has become insane or is no longer a Hindu, in that case only the remaining parent can give the child in adoption. And if suppose both mother and father is there, suppose mother has died, has become sannyasi, has become insane, or has ceased to be a Hindu, or she has converted herself. In that case, father alone can give in adoption. Similarly, goes with if a mother is there and the father is no longer a Hindu, is dead, is a sannyasi, or is insane. In those cases, the mother alone can give in adoption. So in order to give an adoption, parents can give. Otherwise, legal guardian can also give. See, court-appointed guardian can also give that child in adoption. And even the orphanage, the institutions, they can also give that child in adoption. There is no problem. Orphanage may be the adoption under Hindu law is possible that court-appointed guardian can also give that child in adoption. Secondly, who can take in adoption? This is very interesting. So any Hindu above 18 years, sound mind, can adopt a child, provided if that person is married. You want to adopt a child, you are above 18, you are sound mind, well and good. But if you have a spouse, if you have a husband, if you have a wife, then you must take their permission. If you don't take their permission, the adoption is not valid. Without the consent of the spouse, a married person cannot adopt a child. This is very simple. If you want to adopt, get the consent of your spouse, because this is very important, because once the adoption happens, then you will be adoptive parent and your spouse will also be adoptive parent. Like I'm a male, I adopt a child, then I become the adoptive father and my wife becomes adoptive mother. Now mother means mother for all intent and purposes. Now so that is why the consent of the spouse is mandatory. If she does not consent, I cannot adopt a child. That is thin and simple. Acha, if I have already adopted a child when I am a bachelor and then I want to marry, then well and good. That woman will not become adoptive mother of my child. She'll become stepmother. Similarly, if a woman has adopted a child while she is single and then she gets married, then her husband will not be considered adoptive father or father of that child, but rather stepfather. Now, stepfather, there is no actual rights and duties that arise with stepfather or stepmother. But nonetheless, the point is that a person can adopt. If you are married, you must get the consent of your spouse. If you are unmarried, then you can adopt straight away. There is no problem. Acha, there is one more condition as well. See, a Hindu man cannot adopt a girl child unless the age difference between the girl child and the Hindu man is not 21 years. This is very interesting. If a Hindu man wants to adopt a girl child, or if a Hindu woman wants to adopt a boy child, the age gap between the adoptive parent and the child must be 21 years. Like in 31, I can adopt a girl child up to 10 years of age. 21 साल कम से कम मुझसे कम एज होनी चाहिए, so that it's more appropriate. But as far as a boy is considered, boy you can adopt up to 15 years. 15-year is the limit of adoption under Hindu law. So an 18-year-old boy can adopt a 15-year-old boy. So the pitaji se 3 saal chote hain bas bacche. So that is allowed. That is allowed because the same gender is there. At worst gender, you will have to adopt a 21-year-old difference has to be there if you want to adopt a child of different gender. Similarly, there's one more condition, this is very important, that if you already have a child of one gender, you cannot adopt the child of same gender. Meaning thereby, if you have already a son, you cannot adopt a son. Now that previous son might be legitimate, might be true born son, or he might be adopted already. You cannot adopt one more child of the same gender. तो उस जेंडर का बच्चा ही आप ले सकते हैं जिस जेंडर का बच्चा आपके पास नहीं है. If I already have a daughter, I cannot adopt a daughter. You cannot adopt two daughters. Now this question comes at that celebrity adopted two daughters, three daughters. So that is not possible under Hindu law. But secular law it does not have that restriction. But nonetheless, under Hindu law, you cannot adopt two child of same gender. If you already have a son, even a grandson, you cannot adopt a boy. Similarly, if you have a daughter or daughter of a son, in that case, you cannot adopt a girl child. This is very important to understand. Okay. Now the question is, who can be adopted? Now, any child below 15 years can be adopted provided the child is a Hindu. Any Hindu child below 15 years can be adopted. Plus, a child who has already been adopted by one person cannot be adopted by another person. You cannot do the passing the parcel by under law of a child. कि आज मैंने अडॉप्ट किया, कल मैंने दूसरे को दे दिया, परसों ने तीसरे को दे दिया. No. Adoption can happen only once, and once it happens, it is final and irrevocable. Even if the birth parent want to take that child back and adoptive parents want to give that child back, it is not allowed, not permissible. It's once an adoption happens, it is always uh, considered it sealed, fixed for eternity. There's no going back. You cannot cancel the adoption under Hindu law when it happens. And once a child is adopted, he cannot be adopted again. Okay. So adoption can happen only once. So the requirement for who can be adopted is he must be a Hindu, must be below 15 years of age, and should not have been adopted already. यानी कि adoptive parents adoption नहीं दे सकते child, because adoption can happen only once. This much you have to keep in mind. This is about adoption in Hindu law. Okay. I have given you a brief idea. The details you will obviously learn in your law school. Adoption under secular law. Now, there is a Juvenile Justice Care and Protection of Children Act 2015, which provides the process for adoption. Now, the adoption of under secular law is very different from Hindu law. And Hindu law, the parents can give the child in adoption is very simple. But as far as secular law is considered, there is some tricks to be understood. First is, not every child can be adopted under secular law. The child has to be cleared for adoption by what we call a child welfare committee. A child welfare committee has to prescribe that, okay, this child is now cleared for adoption. And who can be cleared for adoption? Three types of children only. Either orphaned, abandoned, or surrendered child. These are three types of children that can be adopted under JJ Act, under secular law. First is obviously orphaned. You understand who means orphaned. If both the parents are dead, that child is orphaned. Similarly, the child who is abandoned. Abandoned means if you cannot trace the parent of the children, you must have heard stories कि भाई मंदिर की सीढ़ियों पर बच्चा छोड़ गए और हॉस्पिटल में और कचरे के डब्बे. And if you are a younger sibling, your elder siblings must have said this to you that actually you have been abandoned and the parents adopted you. So this is so simply if you find a child on the stairs of a temple, you cannot take that child. This is not how adoption works. That child has to be cleared for adoption by the Child Welfare Committee, CWC. A Child Welfare Committee looks at who is the parent, whether they can be traced or not. So either child should be orphaned, both parents are dead. The COVID that happened, unfortunately, a lot. Both the parents were dead and the child was orphaned. Then we have abandoned children, obviously. Then we have surrendered children. See, if somebody gives birth to a child, a woman gives birth to a child, and she is not willing to keep that child because of any reason. Suppose she is not capable of bringing of the child because of any health concern, mental concern, or simply if the couple is there, they are going their separate way. The child is an unwanted child born of incest or a illegitimate relationship. In all those cases, if the parents wants to surrender that child with the permission of the child welfare committee, that child can also be cleared for adoption. So the adoption can be of orphaned child, abandoned child, and surrendered child. So once the child has been cleared for adoption, in that case, the process of adoption can start. Then eligibility. Who can adopt a child in adoption? Now the eligibility is obviously people of sane mind, fit, adult, everything. If married couples are given preference, the couples who are married, they get preference over the single people, and they get preference on the basis of how, um, if they're childless, they get preference. If their marriage is strong and long, they get preference. So there's a preference list, then who will be getting a child. Okay. So the parent should be mentally and physically fit, financially strong, and they should be capable of giving that child a good home. Okay. The parents must be eligible. Acha, single person, if a person is a single, cannot adopt under any circumstances a child of different gender. A single male cannot adopt a female under JJ Act. Neither a single, acha, no, male cannot adopt a female child, but it is not vice versa true. Yani ki a female, a single female can adopt a male as well as a female child. There is no problem. Okay. So eligibility of parents is there. There is a something called adoption regulation. Now, adoption regulation provides detailed eligibility, that who are eligible. They should have a sound marriage, should not have any illness. There should be a limited age gap. Extremely old people cannot adopt a child. So all these things. A child below 18 years can be adopted. So there is no limit under 15. Plus, adopted child can again be adopted under JJ Act. If unfortunately, suppose the child was abandoned, it was adopted by a couple, that couple also died. So that child again becomes orphaned. So he can be again adopted. There's no problem. And to facilitate all this process, we have something called CARA, Central Adoption Resource Agency. And I recommend you to visit the website of CARA. It will give you a very great idea that how adoption works. Then you can apply for an adoptive parent. I do not, that it's not a silly thing. It's a serious matter. There you have an option of adoption, like as an individual, as a couple, or you are adopting from a relative, or you are an NRI. So parents also are considered in three categories. First is obviously most preferred domestic couple, the people who are in India. Then we have NRI couples. They also seek adoption of Indian children. Then we have foreign nationals. The people with overseas citizen of India card, then are NRIs who have OCI status, they are preferred over foreign citizens, and then finally foreign citizens. Okay, so there is a waiting list. Okay, by which the adoption can happen. And the CARA facilitates, Central Adoption Resource Agency. It facilitates the adoption of the children. Every child who is cleared for adoption is placed on CARA website and is offered to the prospective couples, to the adoptive parents. If they select it, if everything matches, then the adoption goes ahead. We'll discuss the process just like that. Okay. Process. Now see, process of Hindu adoption is very simple. Under Hindu adoption, there is no requirement of interference of the government. Government doesn't interfere. You can simply, if you have a son and you want to give that child in adoption, somebody is willing to take it. Everyone is a Hindu, no problem. You can simply give that child, but there should be actually giving and taking. It should not be in the name. The formalities must be followed, and the child must actually be given. कई बार होता है पेपर पे बच्चा दे दिया, एक्चुअली में दिया नहीं. कई बार एक्चुअली में दे दिया पर पेपर वर्क नहीं किया. So in both the cases, the adoption is not valid. For adoption, the adoption deed is required. An adoption deed is required which states that the who is giving that child, who is taking that child, age of the child, consent, everything should happen properly. The child is actually should be given an adoption. Simply because the child was raised by an uncle does not make adoptive that uncle an adoptive parent. Adoption must happen through a process of adoption. Actually, giving and taking of the children should be there, but there is no state interference. Anybody can adopt. Okay, secular adoption has a rigid process, just like I stated that the child, if the government, if the child welfare committee comes to know that there is a child who is either orphaned or abandoned or surrendered, then they make a whole file or make a whole profile of that child. In that profile they state कि child का नाम क्या है, उसकी एज कितनी है, उसके बैकग्राउंड क्या है, उसका हेल्थ स्टेटस क्या है, उसकी पिक्चर्स everything they make a profile, and then they upload it to the Kara portal. Okay, and in Kara portal there are many adoptive parents, है ना, many people have applied for adoption. Okay, and there is a priority list. Obviously, Indian couples have the top priority, then OCIs, then foreign citizens. Then there is a separate list for the children who are hard to place, like children with disability. If there are twin children, they are generally difficult to place. So those children who are hard to place, then they are offered to foreign couples as well on the basis of priority. But the logic is that the child is offered to adoptive parents once if you are top on the line, you have applied for adoption, and if a child is cleared for adoption, then that child's profile will be sent to you. You see that, okay, this child, and if you say, okay, I want to adopt this child, then what happens? The Kara authority, the adoption resource agencies, there are state agencies as well, there are various adoptive agencies. They'll do a home assessment. They'll come to your home, they'll see whether your home is proper or not, it is conducive or not, you are dedicated to having a children or not. Everything they will actually they will find, they'll try and find everything, है ना. अडॉप्शन वो सब प्रयास करेंगे वो लोग, है ना, देखेंगे कि भाई आप ठीक है नहीं है, आपकी मैरिज स्टेबल है या नहीं. Once they do home assessment, they'll approve that yes, this couple is capable of adoption. Then that adoptive child is placed with that couple in foster care. अभी immediately adoption में नहीं देते हैं, immediately adoption नहीं होता. That child is placed in foster care, यानी कि it will be given to you for the sake of guardianship. Only guardianship rights are given to you initially. The child is not given straight away in adoption. So if the child is placed in foster care with that couple or that person, now if that couple, if that person uh, takes good care of that child, and the adoption agency will do home visits, will see whether that child is doing good or not, going to school, everything, that child's well-being is taken care of not. If everything goes all right, then an application is made to the district magistrate. Now this is very important to understand. The district magistrate, if the district magistrate is satisfied that the adoption will be for the benefit of the children, the people who are taking care of it, they deserve to be the parent, then the district magistrate will issue a certificate of adoption. Yes, that this child is adopted by these many people. And once a district magistrate issues the certificate of adoption, the adoption becomes final and binding. Before that, that's not the case. So ultimately, district magistrate, who is the government authority, he gives that child in adoption. देखिए, Hindu law में the parents, the child, guardian of the child was giving that child an adoption. Under JJ Act, only the state, the government, district magistrate is obviously the part of the government. The government is giving that child to you. So that's why there is a rigid process. And it is generally considered difficult because not a lot of children are cleared for adoption. And even if they are cleared, it is difficult to find. है ना, जैसे जैसे उम्र बढ़ती है चाइल्ड की, वैसे वैसे उसका अडॉप्शन और डिफिकल्ट होता है. So if a child is cleared for adoption, the process goes through. Then finally, once the district magistrate approves the adoption, that child becomes the child of that person or that couple for all intent and purposes. Now that child is their child and the law is finalized. Okay. Now it cannot be undone as such. Okay. This is the process of secular adoption. That's why there is a Kara portal. Achha, Kara also facilitate uh, by adoption by step parent or adoption by a relative. Like suppose I want to give my child in adoption to my brother, I am allowed to do that. And under Kara also I can apply to the government for a permission, and the district magistrate can certify that this adoption happened. Similarly to the step parent, suppose there is a single mother. Now she has a child and she finds a good man who is willing to take care of that child as well. So this woman will give that child in adoption to her husband, who is a step parent. Now, once she gives that child in adoption to a step parent, now that child will become the child of that step parent as well for all intent and purposes. So that is also facilitated by Kara or by the government agency under JJ Act. So finally, we have to discuss about inter-country adoption. This is again very interesting. Now, before this JJ Act was there, India actually faced this problem. A lot of foreign couples they used to come to Bharat and they used to adopt a child and take that child to a foreign country. And in that case, we didn't know that what is happening to that child. In fact, they used to accept Hinduism to adopt a child from a very poor couple. They used to simply take that child and give the money. Now, it has to be very clearly mentioned that in adoption process there must not be any consideration, be it in her Hindu law or be it in any law. There must not be any consideration. Consideration means there must not be any exchange of money. Exchange of money makes the process of adoption into trafficking. If you are taking money for giving your child in adoption to some person, that is considered as selling that child, and that is considered trafficking, that is prohibited and punishable both under BNS as well as Prevention of Immoral Trafficking Act, PITA. That is something very important. So that is why inter-country adoption it became a problem for us, because foreign couples came, they found a poor couple with too many children, asked for them. So that is what we have prohibited. Supreme Court in Lakshmi Kant Pandey, there is a famous case, there is a PIL file. In this case, Supreme Court gave multiple guidelines. No, any foreign couple वो आए भारत अब और बच्चा लेकर चले जाएं, this is not allowed. If the adoption has to happen, it has to happen through CARA, Central Adoption and Research Agency. If a foreign couple wants to adopt a child in India, then the Indian embassy or the resource agency there in that country will do the home assessment, whether that foreign couple is capable or is willing to take that child in adoption, or the child will be exploited or will be taken care of. Everything that they will certify. Once they are satisfied, then only the child can be given to the foreign couple. And even after that child is given, the Indian embassy they do periodical checks. They go and see whether the child is taken care of not, or the well-being of the child is ensured or not. And if they find that there is some problem, some issue, then they also have the power to cancel the adoption. So in inter-country adoption, becomes very important. The Indian embassy gets involved. CARA gets involved. The resource agencies, adoption agencies of that country gets involved. So that it's a foolproof process. No child is taken for the purpose of exploitation. This is unfortunately a very bad reality of our society, that the little children are often subjected to a lot of exploitation, often by the people they are adopted, but that becomes a problem. That is why we have this measure, we have this preventive measures that will ensure that a child who is adopted gets a good home and is not subjected to any kind of exploitation or immoral acts. That is the process of adoption. Now, there is no adoption law for Muslims or Christians or any other person. Adoption is of two types: either it's Hindu adoption or it's a secular adoption. So I hope you got some idea about adoption. In the next class, we'll discuss laws related to guardianship and custody. So thank you so much for joining this class. I hope you got something. If you have any doubt, please reach me at animesh@mpdnlu.tc.in. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for being patient listeners. Have a very great day ahead and happy learning.